Assalamu alaikum students. I am Muzaffar Hussain, lecturer Islamia Boys College Quetta. Welcome to the English second year Unit 4 Part D. Previously we discussed Unit 4, the spider and the fly. We discussed the stanzas, we scheme. We also discussed critical analysis and explanations. Today we are going to discuss recognizing genre of literature and also features of poetry. The Spider and the Fly was written by Mary Hewitt. We have covered all of them. Now we are going to discuss literature and poetry. If we talk about literature, so literature most generally is any body or collection of written work. You might have come across books that contains poetry, that contains novels, that contains short stories. Those all are books that are written in literature. And there are languages in the world. Every language has its books. Therefore English has also rich literature. If we discuss literature or define literature further, literature refers to writing considered to be an art form or any single writing deemed to have artistic or intellectual value, and sometimes deploys language in ways that differ from ordinary usage. There is a basic difference between ordinary writing and the writing that is written in literature, because in literature we write to influence, we write to catch the interest of the readers. So we are not writing ordinary language, rather we are using highly figurative or highly literary terms so that we could convey our message in less word efficiently. Another definition of literature is that it is a reflection of the society. Whatever the society is, the same kind or pattern of literature can be seen. If we classify literature, so broadly it is classified into fiction and non-fiction. Fiction generally is a narrative form in any medium consisting of people, events, or places that are imaginary. In other words, not based strictly on history or fact. Fiction is something that we create out of our mind, and there is not any boundary, and we are not bound to write something that exists in the society like facts and figures. In its most narrow usage, fiction refers to written narratives in prose and often specifically novels, though also novellas and short stories. Fiction also include novels, short stories, novellas. So it is something which in which artistic values or artistic creativity of an author comes into the paper. Now, on the other hand, non-fiction is non-fiction is any document or content that purports in a good faith to represent truth and accuracy. Like non-fiction non-fictions deal with events, with information, with real life histories. Non-fiction content may be presented either objectively or subjectively and may sometimes take form of story. You may find some type of story in non-fiction, but those stories are real life events most of the time. So non-fiction can be something like essay, something that is memoir or memory that we have in mobile, something like this. Now in this section there are we can say types of fiction, then types of non-fictions. And types of fictions: novels, mystery novels, detective stories, science fiction that deals with science, also thrillers, horrors, suspense stories. There are movies that has fear in them and used for horror purposes, humorous stories, love stories, adventure stories, drama, comedy, fairy tale, legend, myths, comics. These are all comes under the category of fiction. In non-fiction, there are encyclopedia, biography, textbooks, dictionary, magazines, and newspapers. Non-fiction basically deals with the real life event, history. Now, in this part, there are some types of non-fictions. I would like to describe them like biography. Biography is a type of non-fiction in which someone writes about the life of a character, famous personalities. Autobiography, when someone writes about his or her own life, is known as autobiography. Textbook that are introduced in school and colleges, report that deals with facts and figure and any topic like how many people are educated in Pakistan. Such kind of reports deals with education. Essay is also non-fiction. Memoir, newspapers, web or magazine articles that daily comes, they are also non-fiction. Technical writing, interview, review, history. So these are all broadly non-fictions. Now we come to the poetry, which is the subject of the today's lecture, because we have discussed unit 4, the spider and the fly, which is a story, which is a poet, which is a poem. So poetry is a little bit different from other prose, or we can say fiction, such as novel, short stories, because the language, the style of poetry is totally different from those non-fiction and fiction. Poetry is a collection of words that express an emotion or idea, or sometimes with a specific meaning, sound, or rhythm. In poetry, we use less words, but those less words can have a lot of meaning. Like there are poetries in the world which whose interpretations or explanations can take almost a book or a short book. So this is the beauty of the poetry. Why we write poetry? To express an emotion, like what we feel, express any idea, what do a writer know, or what do writer think about something, with a specific meaning, sound, or rhythm. Like in poetry, there are words. One words can have multiple meaning. One words can symbolize something greater in the world. That can be sounds. In poetry, sound is very important, and also rhythm, because in poetry there is a concept of rhythm. Rhythm means when there is a particular system of we can say particular pattern of words are combined. So when we read them, it is like in a song form. Rhythm means in English the rhythm is the dum. So when a rhythm is played, so automatically we move our feet. Now, lastly, we are going to discuss features of poetry. What are the features, or what are figure of speech used in poetry? First of all, poetry, the first feature is that there are line breaks in poetry. The beauty of poetry is that we do not follow certain grammatical rules or the punctuations that we formally use in prose. Rather, the language of the poetry is totally different from those uh, normal or prose. Writing in short lines to slow the reader down. Like there are lines, in those lines there are limited words. There some most of the time it is not too much long sentences, and one sentence with other sentence, the number of words they are similar with each other almost. The second thing is metaphor. In every language there are figures of speech. In the same way, in English, the figure of speech, there are different figure of speech. There are more than 100 figure of speech, but the most important figure of speech are presented in this lecture, that can also be called features of poetry. Number one, metaphor. Metaphor is a figure of speech where saying that one thing is something else without usage of as or like. When we compare, when we directly link something with something else without using as or like, so it is known as metaphor. Like if we say that he is the lion of the class. Now we are comparing characteristics of lion with the bravery of the person, and we don't use as or like. This is known as metaphor. Why we use figure of speech? Because in figure of speech we use less words, but our meanings, uh, but we increase the meaning, or we brings effects in the poetry or in the language. Second one is imagery. Imagery means when you write certain words that create pictures in the mind of the readers. Like it is the beauty of the poetry that whenever a writer writes poems, so the readers while reading the poem automatically pictures comes in their mind, and they are followed by the next picture. Sometimes a picture can stick the mind of the readers, that they can concentrate more on that part. So it is the beauty of the poetry that imageries are used. If you talk about imagery, different authors have used this concept. Like if we discuss the spider and the fly, in that the imagery is created in our mind when the spider calls out the fly to enter into his den. We also can see the images that the spider praises his house, how his house looks. Those are all can be seen in our, those are all can be felt in our mind. Repetition in poetry, there is also another concept known as repetition. Repetition is that when the writer repeats something, and the repetitions, there could be repetitions of words, repetition of sentence, or repetitions of phrase. The writer repeats something to bring emphasis, or the writer want to bring effects in that part, therefore he can repeat words. Another figure of speech or tools of, we can say, poetry, features of poetry is rhythm. Rhythm is that when the writer, when the poet writes in a specific way, that the words are combined, and when we read out in a song way, or like lyrics, so at that time we feel that the words are combined in a way that rhythm is created. Rhythm is that makes you tap your foot, and in most of the time in English there is a rhythm, the dum, and when they are followed 5 times, it is known as iambic pentameter, and when they are followed 4 times, it is known as iambic tetrameter. Simile. Simile is comparing two things with the use of like, and as. A simile is something that we compare two things with the use of like and as. Like if we say that he is as brave as lion, so it becomes simile. It is as beautiful as valley of Gilgit Baltistan, it becomes simile, because you use this particular word as or like. It is also mostly used in the poetry to to modify or to give extra meaning to something which is in the poetry to something outside of the poetry. Personification. Another figure of speech is personification. It means when we bring out human characteristics into unknown human things. For example, if the poet says that the trees were laughing, and the flowers were shining, so in this way that we say that the trees were laughing. Now laughing is particularly characteristics of human. So how can the tree laugh? We ask question, but in literature this particular concept is known as personification. In the poem the spider and the fly, when we see that the spider is talking to the fly is talking to the spider, it is personification, because the particular way that they talk with each other is the language of human. Last one, alliteration. What is alliteration? Using the same sound at the beginning of the neighboring words. When in a line of a poem, in a one line of the poem, the writer use such kind of words in which particular sound is repeated oftenly, that is known as alliteration. For example, the fine the fine the fine leaves of the fine tree. Now first sound is repeated in this particular sentence, so this is known as alliteration. So here we conclude today's lecture. Thank you so much for listening.